I'd like to also extend a huge welcome to Annette, who's come all the way from a long way to join with us today. We really appreciate it. Your story is absolutely extremely compelling, and we really value the effort you've made to get here today. So look, a huge round of applause for Annette for being here and talking about a very important topic. So while we're pulling up the questions from you guys, I mean, Ian, you mentioned at the at the end or the conclusion of your presentation that swimming, certainly disappointingly, has taken a stance in relation to trans athletes, and that your view is very different to that. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, I have, I think, a very reasonable view in this. And firstly, I think we should look at how we separate what is participation sport and what is elite sport. When I talk about what I'd like to see and what should be expected for trans athletes to be included, I look at two things, and it's inclusivity and it's also around fairness. When I have a conversation with people, no one has an issue around the inclusivity part of it. So there is a willingness and a desire to actually have trans athletes compete, but it's around fairness. And as we've heard in all of these discussions, there isn't enough research to be able to determine something that is scientifically based, to be able to make an assessment of how you have athletes that may be born and then transition in, and we're mostly talking about female to male people competing that have transitioned through to that. But there is not enough research. So anything that says that it is around fairness is inaccurate at this stage. So it may mean that we have to look at each individual case. Athletes that may be prepubescent and take puberty blockers may be classified into a different category, that it may have had no effect, but we need more research. The same as if an athlete transitions after they've gone through puberty, and if there's benefits of actually of having done that, we have to make that assessment there as well. It will probably mean that athletes that have transitioned will have to take levels of hormones that means that there will be fair play. But as we've heard, we assume that testosterone is a stronger gene, is stronger than what estrogen is. We don't have enough research. So if anyone tells you that scientifically they've made this decision on whether people can compete and to make it fair, it's inaccurate. And going to another category, which is what my sport, World Aquatics, looked at doing, was basically they created a category that was called other. It wasn't a solution, but I've been reassured that it is actually a moving issue with them, and they're prepared to move on this. But we're at the very early stages of it, and I don't want to take up too much time.
Great, thanks, Ian. I think it's certainly a very sensible approach. Annette, again, very interesting presentation. You indicated that from 2012, your advisor, you were unable to compete. You didn't feel that you could speak publicly about it until you had the enormous support from Dr. Pashoni, and I think that occurred in 2019. What has been the reaction to the athletics community, to your friends, to your family, to you coming out and speaking about the experiences and the situation you've had to deal with?
Yeah, like according to me, it's something which is in my life, which is moving on. So it doesn't matter about my family, but it's me who is feeling it. So when I come in front, there are many there behind who are feeling like to come in the media, like talking about it. Yeah, but because when I come in front and I talk about it, they also be there and they feel strong. They say, oh, we're having someone who is leading us now, giving us courage. So they also start becoming strong. Yeah.
Right, so it's actually helped you to deal with it, to feel positive about it, to actually get on the front foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly fantastic. So well done. Ricky, you gave a kind of inspiring discussion in terms of how Athletics Australia treated you in the early 90s, very different to what Ian's experienced in swimming. What do you think, how would Athletics Australia treat you today if you were the young Ricky Coghlan in the same position you were back in the early 90s?
Well, I had the good fortune of working with Athletics Australia in constructing their trans inclusion policy. And working under that one, it would have been that it's basically if one signs up to a category, I guess, to athletics in good faith to compete in whatever category they feel most comfortable, they are free to do so. And that is basically the position now of Athletics Australia. So they've moved along, they've looked a little at what science there is, and they've looked at the values of the sport and come back to that fundamental conversation that I had with Athletics New South Wales in 1991, which was athletics is a sport for everyone and there's a place in this sport for you. So that is a position that Athletics Australia have basically encapsulated within their policy now. And when it comes to elite sport and elite pathways, then they have to enter into a conversation with World Athletics or what we have been also hearing, the international body, the International Athletics Federation, as they used to be called. So it is basically a very inclusive policy now. So, and we're seeing that across a great many sports. So, and I think that that's also, again, thanks to the good work of the team at Pride in Sport Australia, and hope that that will, our example in athletics and many other sports in Australia, can serve to show what the world can do.
Great, thanks, Ricky. Now we have a question from Shelley, and I think it relates, and it's a question to you, but I think I'm going to open it up to the panel as a whole. Ian, how do we get inclusivity at the grassroots of community sport when it feels as if you're the only gay?
I think it's probably opening up the discussion of how many people who are gay that actually are involved in sport. It's providing, if we're looking at, if this is for questions quite wide, because if this is about kids, it's also the introduction of knowing that we live in a diverse community. So it's conversations around that to actually have sporting organisations at a local level that actually support that inclusivity. That's a conversation that can then continue throughout the club, and they can come up with policies and frameworks that are being advised by organisations that have an understanding of what is best. I have complaints that come from mums that think that I must be so proud that there's this young kid that's competing against their kid that happened to beat them, that is transitioning, that has already accepted that they were born or feeling that they're in the wrong sex. And at that stage, and at the age that they're talking about, that child actually has no advantage. In fact, they may be at a disadvantage at that particular point in time. So it's for people to have a greater understanding. Education is key, and it really is bringing a collective group forward on this.
Great, thank you. Ricky, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, I think that it goes to what I spoke about before. It is leadership, and it's about getting clubs on board. It's about also conversations that we generally have across the community, because sport reflects community. Sport also informs community. And this is why the conversation around an inclusive and diverse nation can really centre on sport, because sport is such a strong part of our culture and even our national identity. And so I think that when we hear people in the community basically creating, like what Ian was referring to in his talk, that when we hear slurs against gay people or trans people, that this dampens this effect. We need to come back against that in sport and create that atmosphere that is inclusive and that says, no, that's wrong. We want a change in culture, and we will do that through sport. So it is about starting at the top with the sporting organisations, but it's also what we do down in the community, what messages we get from the signals we're hearing from the top of our sporting bodies. And that is just so important, because in the end, it's about leadership and culture.
Thanks, thanks, Ricky. Dr. Pashoni, I think you're with us. A fascinating discussion. Thank you for being up so late. Switzerland, I think it must be the middle of the morning, so thank you for bearing with us. It would be great if you could give us maybe some of the stats in terms of the prevalence of the athletes you're working with, in terms of those athletes that have some variation of sex characteristics, and touch on a little bit about some of the work you're doing with the Global Observatory that you head up.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This is such a fascinating panel, and I really miss the fact that I'm not there in person. I thank you for the question. The prevalence is a question that someone like the president of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe, talks about, because he talks about this whole, fear of floodgates of athletes with innate variations in sex characteristics or trans athletes in sport. This is not something that I would like to talk about, to be fair. Prevalence is something that you must ask the federations, because they are more concerned. What I am concerned about is the violation of rights of young women athletes in sport who love sport, and therefore they are trying to be part of sport, but their rights are violated without often any of us knowing, as you heard from Annette Negesa as well, when she went through that whole entire investigation in France. She was alone, 19 years old, not knowing French, so the doctors were not able to communicate clearly to her. She didn't know what was going on. And then the surgery in Uganda that happened without her informed consent. So those are things that I would rather want to talk about than prevalence. But obviously, if we worked on a Human Rights Watch report where we were able to interview 13 athletes from across Africa and Asia, that means that there are quite a few of them who are facing, who are impacted by these regulations. And this is only track and field. There are several cases, for example, in football that I'm dealing with. To be fair, in swimming, I don't know why, and I'm mentioning swimming because already Mr. Thorpe spoke about swimming in such an and the problems of that particular regulation. In swimming, I have no idea if they have ever come across any athlete with innate variations in sex characteristics yet. The only reason for that particular regulation was just one athlete in North America. It was a reaction to just one case and a fear of floodgates. I don't know where that comes from. And that it was a reaction to just one person and all the lobbying that happened around stopping that one person from competing in swimming. So we need to understand that it's not about how many athletes are impacted. Even if one athlete is impacted by it, we need to act against these regulations. So prevalence is not what I would like to talk about. The Global Observatory, on the other hand, has a larger mandate. And as of now, we are focusing on, we do research, so monitoring and evaluation research, and we call it ENQUIRE. So we have ENQUIRE, Engage, and Enable. These are our three work streams. We do research, monitoring, and evaluation. We engage with international federations as well as national governments and other organizations in sport and athletes as well. So we also do capacity building work. It's a new organization which came out of the UNESCO's Kazan Action Plan, and we are setting it up from last year in Lausanne in the Olympic capital. Recently, because we are focusing on three different key thematic areas, our first research and action think tank thematic area is inclusive gender equality. So recently we hosted a conference where Ms. Negesa had come and spoken very powerfully as well. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's a very apt description in terms of prevalence is not the key issue. It's basically making sure that all individuals' human rights are respected and treated treated equally. We've had a question that come through, and I'm going to ask it to each of the panelists if we can be pretty quick in terms of your responses. We've only got a short time left. What advice would you give to your younger self when dealing with the adversities through your younger years? And Ian, when you answered the question, you actually pointed out some of the problems you think you would have experienced by coming out earlier, given the travel and the places you were competing. would that have changed if you're coming out now?
Okay, so is that, yes, it would be. So the numbers, so marriage equality support in 2004, I was still competing then, was just over a third. It was 70% when it came time for the vote. So that's how significantly things have shifted during that period of time. You know, it's also, you have to understand people's personal experience as well. There's no right time to come out for some people. And when you're dealing with a level of expectation where you don't feel like you can handle one more thing to be able to get through, you know, I didn't have the ability to be able to do it then. I do wish that I had been out earlier because of the example that you can set that makes it easier for others to come out.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's as quick as I could go.
Awesome, and I think the point is that no one should feel forced to come out. Everyone's experiences are different, and we need to be respectful of that. Ricky, thoughts on that question?
Believe in yourself.
Great. And Annette, if you look back at your younger self, would have there been things you would have done a little bit differently?
Yeah, like I had a problem with the decision making, something like that. Like deciding I have to do this, whereby really, to something which was really very hard for me. Whereby when I love something so much, so like I end up like I'm doing a mistake. So I won't be different with her point, decision making, like be yourself. Yeah, and you do the own decision, so that's it.
Great. Well, thank you. Look, on behalf of the audience that's here in person, on behalf of the audience that hears remotely, I'd like to give a huge warm thanks to all of our panellists, Ian, Prashoni, Ricky and Annette, for a fabulous discussion, extremely interesting, very topical, and I'd like to wish you all a very happy World Pride and World Pride Human Rights Conference. Thank you.